So I get the pleasure of introducing our next group. We are going to have a lightning talk. We're going to peel back the curtain and show the voice of God. Ryan Merkley of Aspen Digital is the fantastic voice who has been introducing our panels and speakers for the day. So Ryan is going to come out. He's going to have a one-on-one with Sami Khoury, who is the head of the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. So let me welcome out Ryan and Sami.
Thanks, Jeff. All right. I did it, dropped it, there we go. Hey folks. Sami, thanks for being here with us. Nice to be able to have a bit of a chat together. Also, we're the two Canadians, so we'll be representing the nation for this portion of your program. I'm not going to assume that everyone here is fluent in the cybersecurity infrastructure and defenses of the neighbor to the north. So maybe I'll just give you a second to maybe just paint the picture for the center which you lead and sort of where it fits in Canada's cyber defenses.
Sure. Thanks, Ryan, and thanks to Aspen for inviting me to be part of this great event today. So the Cyber Center that I lead, or the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, the full name, is part of the Communication Security Establishment, which is sort of the NSA equivalent in Canada. We are sort of a information security, cybersecurity, and intelligence agency, so a bit of half-half. We do both. We are part of the Department of Defense up there, and in 2018, the government sort of brought together all of the cyber expertise across government into this one place called the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, and we rebranded ourselves. So our public image is under the logo of Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, and gave us a mandate that is a national mandate, so it's not just defend government, but also critical infrastructure, small, medium businesses, and citizenry. So it's a full scope program that we have in the Cyber Center, and our partners would be, on the US side, our partners would be NSA and CISA.
Great. I want to pick up the threads that we've started today around ransomware. You, to your left, have a copy of the report, your threat assessment report. It's a document you all update every couple of years, lots of research behind it. And in that report, one of the things you talked about is your concerns around companies that have been paying ransoms. And you note the stat that stuck out to me is that in one of the surveys that you reviewed, only 42% of companies who paid the ransoms actually even got their data back. And so what is your advice to companies who are facing this challenge, and how are you supporting them in that process?
Thanks. So the document Ryan is referring to is called the National Cyber Threat Assessment, and it's a document that we put out every 2 years roughly that looks at the threat landscape in Canada and a projection in the next 2 years. Ransomware is recognized in this year's edition, which we released about 10 days ago, as the top threat that Canadian businesses will face. The challenge we have in Canada, and I suspect it's the same here in the US, is that ransomware continues to be underreported for whatever reason, and that's something that I and the team is trying to understand. Why is it that ransomware continues to be underreported? We don't have an official sort of government policy or government directive on payment of ransom. The recommendation is not to pay. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, it is a business decision. If a company wants to pay the ransom, it is a business decision. But know that in paying the ransom, there's a number of sort of fine print that they need to be aware of, and getting the data back is one of them. Dealing with a criminal organization is another one. As far as what are we doing to support them, we've launched a fairly large campaign last December, to bring attention to the ransomware issue. And it was the first time in my career at CSC, and I've been there 30 years now, it's my first time that I see 4 cabinet ministers pen a letter to businesses inviting them to pay attention to the problem, not inviting them, basically asking them, please pay attention to the problem. This is a serious thing. It was an open letter to businesses. Along with it, we published a playbook to help companies how to protect themselves from ransomware, but should they fall victims to ransomware, what can we do to help them sort of in the recovery phase of ransomware? And it's a playbook that has received very good positive feedback that's also on our website.
You mentioned it in your comments that a lot of them don't report it, and you also cite that in your report that you more broadly don't get the kinds of reports you wish you got about incidents. And it's come up around the room today, and others have asked folks to report. Why should businesses make that risk? Why should they get past the general counsel and talk to you? And what do you bring to bear if they do?
To give a sense of the scale of the problem, last year we received 304 reports of ransomware. Considering the size of Canada, considering the businesses in Canada, that is way underreported. And to try to tease out why is it. So we've been engaging with companies, and we get all sort of, I would say, explanation to why is it that they don't report. Some of them say, my cyber insurance policy prevents me from talking to you. Some of them legal counsel is concerned about maybe misunderstanding our mandate as a pure cyber defense agency. We're not law enforcement. We're not a regulatory agency. But I think there is value in reporting, and that applies equally to Canada, to the States. By giving us visibility into the nature of the incidents, we can then understand what happened. We can understand maybe who did it. We can update our advice and guidance. We constantly publish advice and guidance. If we connect enough dots, we might identify a campaign that is launched maybe by a cyber criminal or a nation-state campaign targeting research labs or whatever. So there is absolutely value in us understanding what happened, understanding how it happened, but also connecting enough dots to start to paint a picture of what actually is going on.
And do you have examples where you've been able to do that, or are there situations where you've been able to step forward or paint that picture?
We've had a number of cases where in the early days of the pandemic, we've connected enough dots that we understood that, for example, there was a Russian-led campaign against COVID research labs, and then we participated with our international partners in calling out that activity to say, this is unacceptable, this is crossing some red lines in terms of cyber norms. So that is an example of having enough connected dots to identify that there was a campaign. Beside that, I think we've seen a number of municipalities unfortunately being hit by ransomware. Knowing what is the strain of ransomware that has hit, we are able sometimes either to pass it on to law enforcement, or at CSE we do have some authorities to conduct active cyber operations and impose a cost on some of these cyber criminals. So again, that is the value. It's not something that we're going to publish and we're launching a campaign tomorrow or anything like that, but behind the scene we are fairly active in making sure that there is a cost to conducting these activities.
I want to stay on this for just one more beat. In that same threat assessment, we talked about cryptocurrency and its relationship. And obviously, we had a panel earlier today where we talked about U.S. responses around issues around ransomware and cryptocurrency, and what the government in the U.S. is doing around those issues. I'm interested in how the Canadian position is and how it aligns with the work. I know you work closely with the U.S., but I want to give you a chance to talk about the Canadian position and perhaps how you're addressing that threat and how you're trying to advise Canadians and Canadian businesses on that.
In our National Cyber Threat Assessment, for the first time, we also we identify as one of the 5 themes in the document emerging tech or disruptive technology, and more specifically digital assets, cryptocurrencies, and how it is a capability that has a double-edged sword. It is an evolution of maybe the financial market, but it's also used by cyber criminal. There is currently no prohibition or no mechanism in Canada to control cryptocurrencies or exchanges or mixers or any of that, but we are participating in the White House-led counter-ransomware initiative. So obviously, as one of the 36 countries around the table, we do work with our US colleagues to make sure that we're aligned in our thinking on how do we manage that space. I think eventually we will pay attention and maybe pass some regulation around that. There is currently regulation for, I would say, the standard money flow, illicit financing. Eventually we will get to the cryptocurrency itself.
Right. Let's change gears and talk a little bit about distributed work. There's a section also in your report where you talk about hybrid and distributed workplaces. We were all forced to work from home during the pandemic, including government offices. Many had to work from home. And that, as you note, really expanded the attack vector because the office was actually the home office network. And they're typically less secured. And also I have 42 devices connected to my home network, including my kids' Nintendo and like whatever IoT devices. And so, how are you thinking about that in terms of advising around cybersecurity and the increased threat of home working to cyber attacks?
I think hybrid work, remote work is here to stay and is going to be part of the future of work as we see it. We have, obviously, we have concern with bring your own devices and maintaining the security of those bring your own devices. So for us in the Canadian government, the position that we've taken is that it's a government issued device. It is VPN always on. We have enabled in some cases split tunneling, but I think we are seeing that there are some issues with the way departments have implemented split tunneling, so we're preparing some updated advice on how do you split tunnel. Also, we've seen folks take advantage of the VPN or at least trying to break into the VPN or circumvent the VPN. So for us, that's why the advice is VPN always on. We've seen cases of, our recommendation is actually to also move into hard tokens as opposed to just soft token like PKI certificates or things like that. So we continue to raise the bar on security for the work from home. It used to be that the perimeter of the building used to be enough, but now because the perimeter has been expanded, we have to look at what other things do we complement our security at home. Obviously, we don't want to touch your home IT and we don't want to control your routers. So how do we make sure that the work device is protected? And that's why we are definitely promoting the always-on VPN and smart split tunneling.
And what about the sort of broader infrastructure? I mean, Canada had quite a high-profile network failure very recently. Rogers, which is one of the big telcos in Canada, had a multi-day outage that took down cell phone service, payments, a bunch of banks, concerts canceled, everything. Much of the country ground to a halt when one major provider went down. Their story is that it was not a cyber crime. It was actually a failure to update their systems properly, but obviously would raise big questions as someone worried about the broader infrastructure of the network. How do you think about that piece when that network also provided home internet to millions and millions of subscribers across country?
Yeah, that was a very challenging day, waking up and recognizing that internet is down, not just at home for me, but the whole province of Ontario pretty much, or at least all the users of Rogers were down, and was a frantic set of phone calls just to try to identify what is happening. It turns out that this was not a cyber incident, but it was I'd probably call it a QA issue in a software update that brought down the entire network in an unfortunate cascading sequence of events. It has brought to the forefront the whole issue of resilience, and probably one of my favorite words. And now the telcos are working together, Rogers, Bell, TELUS, and some of the other big operators in Canada, to look at ways to build a resilience amongst them, so that if it just happens that the seniors had 2 SIMs or 3 SIMs, and they could swap the SIM out of their phone and switch to another one. But Canadians cannot do that. They cannot afford to have, in case of emergency, break glass and take a SIM from another operator. So how do the various operators make sure that if there's a failure on one, that maybe there is some resilience on the other one? It's a work package that has been prescribed by actually our Minister of Industry, and we lead the conversation amongst the telecom operator to make sure that that progresses. So there is a commitment that has been made. There are some letters that have been signed. Obviously, implementation, the devil is in the details, and that will take some time. But definitely, it opened our eyes to how fragile we find ourselves in.
I want to use the last bit of our time to talk about China.
Yes.
Russia has been front and center, but China is also an ever-present concern, and Canada has a fraught relationship, especially more recently. Even just yesterday, our Prime Minister, in a bit of an argument perhaps with the Chinese president at a meeting, there are concerns both on the hardware side and also on the state actor and state behavior side. From your perspective, do the West and China sort of need to have a complete cleavage of technology, or are there ways for them to find that they can work together? Are there terms under which you could feel comfortable with that kind of a relationship?
I don't think that the complete cleavage of technology is a workable option, and international standards are there for a reason, and they're transparent and open, and we need to work together with like-minded nations to do that. Obviously, transparency is very important, and for as long as that technology is not transparent, we will be challenged in adopting it. We have managed to work with our telecom operators to manage the risk around Chinese technology, but it is ever in the backdrop of our threat landscape. And in the report we call out China and Russia and Iran and North Korea as state-sponsored activity that are of concern. So the key word here is transparency, and I don't think anything will change until we have some clearer transparencies.
Yeah. Sami, thanks for coming to speak to us. Thank you for the work you do.
Thanks, Ryan.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right.